My name is Clara Whitmore. I turned 102 years old this spring. People always ask me the same question. Clara, what's your secret? They expect me to whisper the name of an expensive vitamin, maybe a miracle supplement, some new diet the television has been talking about. I always disappoint them, because the truth is far less exciting and far more powerful. If someone walked into my kitchen this morning, they wouldn't find protein powders lined up across the counter. There wouldn't be calorie-counting charts taped to the refrigerator, no detox drinks, no miracle teas, no frozen meals promising to erase 30 years of bad habits in 30 days. Instead, they'd find dried lentils in a glass jar, fresh herbs hanging by the window, a loaf of homemade bread cooling on the table, a bottle of olive oil that's been part of almost every meal I've eaten for decades. Simple foods. Foods my grandmother recognized. Foods her grandmother recognized. Foods that existed long before factories learned how to turn meals into products. I've lived through wars, economic depression, food shortages, television, the internet, and now artificial intelligence. I've watched nutrition advice change so many times that I've lost count. One decade eggs were dangerous. The next decade they became healthy again. Butter was called the enemy, then sugar, then fat, then carbohydrates. Every few years, someone announces they've finally discovered the perfect way to eat. Yet somehow, people seem more confused than ever, more exhausted, more dependent on medications. That made me wonder something many years ago. What if the healthiest way to eat wasn't hidden inside a laboratory? What if it had been quietly sitting in plain sight for thousands of years? I began reading scripture differently, not searching for miracles, searching for everyday life, what ordinary families cooked, what travelers carried, what shepherds packed, what people shared around the table after long days of work. I noticed something remarkable. Again and again, the same simple ingredients appeared. Not because they were fashionable, because they sustained life. Modern researchers spend millions studying foods that ancient families prepared without microscopes, nutrition labels, or scientific journals. That doesn't mean everything people ate in biblical times was automatically perfect, but it does remind us that generations survived, worked, raised children, and reached old age eating foods nature provided, not foods manufactured to last 5 years on a supermarket shelf. So today, I'd like to share the first of the 5 meals that still appear on my table almost every week. Not because they're magical, because they've stood the test of time. Meal 1. A humble bowl of lentil stew. If you asked most people what lentils taste like, many couldn't tell you. Some have never eaten them. Others think they're boring. I used to think that too, until I realized that civilizations don't build traditions around foods that fail them. Lentils have nourished families across the Middle East for thousands of years. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that people were cooking them long before the great kingdoms of Israel were established. There's a reason they endured. A single bowl carries an impressive balance of plant protein, fiber, iron, folate, magnesium, and potassium. Today we understand that these nutrients support muscles, healthy blood, nerve function, and steady energy. Ancient families simply knew that after eating lentils, they could keep working. When I prepare mine, I never rush. The evening before, I rinse the lentils and leave them soaking overnight. My grandmother insisted on doing this. She couldn't explain phytates or mineral absorption. She simply smiled and said, "The beans will be kinder to your stomach tomorrow." Years later, I learned scientists discovered she had been right all along. The soaking process helps reduce compounds that may interfere with absorbing certain minerals. Sometimes tradition discovers wisdom centuries before science explains it. The next morning, I cook them slowly. Never in a hurry. I add onions, garlic, carrots, celery, fresh parsley, a little cumin, sometimes thyme, sometimes coriander. The aroma fills the whole house long before lunch. People think herbs only make food taste better. Many of them also provide natural plant compounds that support digestion and reduce oxidative stress. Again, our ancestors didn't use those scientific words. They simply knew certain combinations made people feel well. Before serving, I drizzle extra virgin olive oil across the top. Not much, just enough to give the stew richness. Healthy fats help our bodies absorb certain nutrients more efficiently, while also making a simple meal deeply satisfying. When lunch is over, I don't feel sleepy. I don't crave cookies an hour later. I don't go searching through cupboards for snacks. The energy arrives slowly and stays with me. At my age, steady energy is worth more than excitement. I've learned something after more than a century. Your body rarely thanks you for extremes. It thanks you for consistency. One nourishing meal, prepared with patience, shared with gratitude, repeated over many years. That kind of eating may not become a headline, but it has carried me through 102 remarkable years. And this is only the beginning, because the second meal on my table has been feeding ordinary workers, travelers, and families for generations. And modern science is only beginning to understand why it may be one of the greatest grains ever grown. When people hear that I've reached 102, they often assume I spend my days worrying about food. I don't. The older I've become, the less complicated eating has become. I've learned that health isn't built by chasing hundreds of ingredients. It's built by repeating a handful of good habits for a lifetime. The second meal I return to again and again is one that many people today have almost forgotten. Not because it disappeared, because convenience replaced craftsmanship. Meal 2. Homemade barley bread with extra virgin olive oil. Every Saturday afternoon, my mother would knead dough on an old wooden table worn smooth by generations of hands. There were no electric mixers, no timers. She'd judge the dough by touch. She'd press her finger into it and smile. "Not yet," she'd say. As a little girl, I didn't understand why she insisted on making bread from barley whenever she could find it. Years later, I finally understood. Barley is one of the oldest cultivated grains in human history. It nourished families through difficult seasons because it was hearty, dependable, and surprisingly satisfying. Today, scientists talk about beta-glucan, a soluble fiber found in barley. Research suggests it can help support healthy cholesterol levels, encourage a balanced blood sugar response after meals, and feed beneficial bacteria living inside the digestive system. My mother knew none of those words. She simply noticed that after eating barley bread, people stayed full longer. Farmers could work from sunrise until afternoon without constantly searching for another meal. That kind of steady nourishment is something many people rarely experience today. Instead, breakfast is often sweet enough to taste like dessert. Energy rises quickly, then disappears just as fast. When I bake barley bread, I mix it with warm water, a little sea salt, natural yeast, and patience. Good bread cannot be rushed. Once it's finished, I never spread it with sugary toppings. Instead, I pour a little extra virgin olive oil into a shallow dish. Sometimes I sprinkle crushed rosemary, sometimes oregano, occasionally cracked black pepper. Then I tear off a warm piece of bread and dip it gently into the oil. Simple, fragrant, completely satisfying. Olive oil has been treasured around the Mediterranean for thousands of years. Modern nutrition researchers often point to its monounsaturated fats and naturally occurring polyphenols, compounds associated with supporting heart health and helping the body manage everyday inflammation. But perhaps the greatest gift of olive oil isn't found in a laboratory. It's that it encourages people to slow down. You don't gulp fresh bread dipped in olive oil while driving. You sit. You share. You chew. You talk. Perhaps eating slowly has nourished as many lives as the food itself. By the time lunch is finished, I feel content, not heavy. Satisfied, not sleepy. At my age, that's a blessing I never take for granted. Meal 3. Grilled fish with fresh herbs. The third meal is one my family has prepared for generations. Fresh fish, simply grilled. Nothing fancy, no thick batter, no heavy sauces trying to hide the taste. If the fish is good, it doesn't need to pretend to be something else. My late husband loved fishing. On quiet mornings, we'd leave before sunrise, while the world was still wrapped in mist. Sometimes we returned with enough fish for the whole family. Sometimes we came home with only stories. Either way, the morning was never wasted. The fish we enjoyed most were rich, oily varieties whenever they were available. Today, we know these fish provide valuable omega-3 fatty acids, including EPA and DHA. Those nutrients play important roles in supporting the brain, eyes, heart, and nervous system. As we grow older, preserving those systems becomes increasingly important. I often tell my great-grandchildren that memory isn't protected in a single day. It's cared for over decades. One meal, one habit, one choice at a time. When I prepare fish, I season it lightly. Fresh parsley, dill, thyme, a squeeze of lemon, a little garlic. That's usually enough. Then I grill it over moderate heat until it flakes easily with a fork. The herbs don't overpower the fish. They simply remind you that nature already knows how to create beautiful flavors. People sometimes ask if I ever become bored eating such simple meals. I smile every time. I've never understood why we expect food to entertain us. Its first responsibility is to nourish us. When nourishment comes first, enjoyment follows naturally. One of the greatest lessons I've learned after living more than a century is this: complicated isn't always better. Our modern world celebrates endless choices, yet peace often comes from choosing well instead of choosing endlessly. A slice of warm barley bread, a little olive oil, fresh grilled fish, shared around a table with people you love. I've eaten meals in expensive restaurants. I've attended grand celebrations. But very few of those meals remain in my memory. The simple ones do, because they weren't only feeding my body, they were feeding my life. And the next meal I'll tell you about may surprise you even more. It begins with one of humanity's oldest fermented foods, and a spoonful of sweetness that has been treasured for thousands of years. By the time you reach my age, you begin to notice something curious. The strongest people I've known were rarely the ones chasing perfection. They were the ones who respected simple routines. They didn't need every meal to be exciting. They needed it to be dependable. The fourth and fifth meals I still enjoy every week remind me of that lesson every single time I prepare them. Meal 4. Goat milk, yogurt with raw honey. I still remember the first time I watched my grandmother make yogurt. There were no shiny stainless steel machines, no digital thermometers, just warm milk, a clay crock, and patience. She believed living foods should be treated gently. Perhaps that's why the yogurt always tasted different from anything sold in stores today. It was rich, tangy, alive. As I grew older, I learned that not all dairy is the same. Goat's milk has naturally smaller fat globules than most cow's milk, making it easier for many people to digest. Its protein structure is also somewhat different, which is one reason some people who struggle with ordinary dairy find goat's milk more comfortable. Of course, every person is different. What works for me may not work for everyone. But after more than a century, I've learned to pay attention to how food makes my body feel instead of simply following headlines. The real transformation happens when milk becomes yogurt. Fermentation changes everything. Tiny beneficial bacteria begin doing work that no expensive supplement can imitate exactly. They help create a living food that supports a healthy digestive system and contributes to a balanced gut microbiome. Scientists continue discovering just how closely our digestive system communicates with the rest of the body, our immune system, our metabolism, even our mood. My grandmother couldn't explain any of that. She simply smiled and said, "A happy stomach helps make a happy person." Sometimes old wisdom arrives before scientific language catches up. I enjoy a bowl of plain goat milk yogurt several mornings each week. Then comes my favorite part: a spoonful of raw honey. Not enough to turn breakfast into dessert, just enough to bring everything together. Honey has fascinated people for thousands of years. It contains natural antioxidants, trace minerals, enzymes, and plant compounds that researchers continue studying for their potential health benefits. Throughout history, it has been valued not only as food, but also for its traditional use in caring for wounds and soothing sore throats. What I appreciate most is something much simpler. Honey reminds me that sweetness doesn't have to come from excess. A little is enough. That lesson applies to life as much as breakfast. Today, sugar hides almost everywhere. Breakfast cereals, soft drinks, sauces, bread, even foods people believe are healthy. Our taste buds become accustomed to constant sweetness until real food begins to seem bland. When that happens, we've lost something precious. Real yogurt with a little honey doesn't overwhelm the senses. It teaches them to appreciate balance again. I often eat this meal while sitting near my kitchen window. No television, no phone, just morning light and birds outside. I think digestion begins long before the first bite. It begins with peace. Meal 5. Fresh figs with almonds. The final meal isn't really a meal at all. It's what I reach for during the afternoon when I want something nourishing without feeling heavy. Fresh figs whenever they're in season, dried figs when they aren't, and a small handful of almonds. That's it. Simple enough that many people overlook it. Yet nature often hides extraordinary nutrition inside ordinary things. Figs are naturally rich in fiber, potassium, calcium, and beneficial plant compounds. The fiber helps support healthy digestion while making the fruit wonderfully satisfying. Almonds bring another kind of nourishment. Healthy, unsaturated fats, plant protein, vitamin E, magnesium. Together they create a combination that satisfies hunger far longer than processed snack foods ever could. I've watched friends spend fortunes on energy bars wrapped in shiny packages. Then, an hour later, they're hungry again. Meanwhile, a handful of almonds and 2 figs keep me content through the afternoon. I believe food should leave you feeling stronger, not constantly wanting more. There's another reason I treasure this simple snack. It teaches restraint. Notice I didn't say a whole bag of almonds or an entire jar of honey. Longevity has taught me that even wonderful foods deserve moderation. People often search for one miraculous ingredient that guarantees a long life. I've never found one. Instead, I found hundreds of ordinary choices repeated faithfully over many years. That's where health quietly grows, not in dramatic transformations, but in steady habits. As I arrange figs and almonds on a small plate, I sometimes think about how little my body truly needs compared to how much the modern world insists I should consume. More products, more flavors, more supplements, more promises. Yet peace has always sounded different. Peace whispers, enough. Enough food to nourish you. Enough gratitude to appreciate it. Enough wisdom to stop chasing what was never missing. These 5 meals have never made me feel deprived. They've made me feel free. Free from constantly wondering what diet comes next. Free from fearing every new headline. Free to spend my time living instead of obsessing over eating. And after 102 years, I believe that's one of the healthiest decisions I've ever made. Because in the end, food is only part of the story. The greatest lesson longevity has taught me has nothing to do with lentils, barley, fish, yogurt, figs, or almonds. It has everything to do with what we carry inside our hearts. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with next. People often assume that once you've lived for more than a century, you've discovered some hidden secret that everyone else has missed. I wish it were that simple. The truth is, I haven't uncovered a secret. I've simply had enough years to see patterns. I've watched neighbors spend enormous amounts of money trying to buy health, while ignoring the habits that quietly build it. I've seen people chase miracle cures, but neglect sleep. Purchase expensive supplements, but never take a walk outside. Measure every calorie while forgetting to laugh. Eventually, I realized something that changed the way I look at growing older. Food is important. Movement is important. Rest is important. But none of them can replace a peaceful mind. When I was in my 40s, I worried about almost everything. Money, my children, whether I was doing enough, whether I had enough, whether tomorrow would somehow be better than today. Those worries followed me everywhere. Then one afternoon, my mother looked at me and asked a question I'll never forget. She said, "Clara, how much of what you worried about last year actually happened?" I thought about it for a long time. Very little. Most of it had existed only inside my imagination. That conversation changed me. Not overnight, but little by little. I began letting go of problems I couldn't solve. I learned the difference between responsibility and unnecessary worry. One asks you to act. The other only steals today's peace. At 102, I can tell you with complete honesty that peace is one of the healthiest gifts you can give your body. I've also learned that loneliness can be just as harmful as poor nutrition. The happiest people I've known weren't surrounded by luxury. They were surrounded by connection. A neighbor who stopped by, friends who shared meals, children who called just to say hello, a church family, a gardening club, someone who remembered your birthday. Those simple relationships gave people a reason to wake up each morning. Science now speaks about social connection, stress hormones, and healthy aging. I'm grateful researchers continue discovering these things. But many families understood this long before there were scientific journals. People healed together, worked together, grieved together, celebrated together. Meals weren't rushed between appointments. They were opportunities to share stories. I believe that is one reason so many older generations carried such quiet resilience. They knew they belonged somewhere. Another lesson took me much longer to learn. Your body changes. That isn't failure. It's life. When I was 20, I could carry heavy baskets across the farm without stopping. At 40, I could work all day and still dance with my husband in the evening. At 60, I noticed my knees talking back. At 80, I walked a little slower. Today, at 102, I still move every day. Not because I'm trying to prove something, because movement is gratitude in action. Every morning I stretch. I walk through my garden. I water the flowers. Some days I need more rest. I listen. I've stopped treating my body like a machine that must perform. Instead, I treat it like an old friend that deserves kindness. Perhaps that's another mistake we make today. We constantly fight against aging instead of learning how to age well. There is dignity in growing older. There is beauty in experience. Every wrinkle on my face remembers someone I loved. Every gray hair reminds me that I was fortunate enough to keep living. I wouldn't trade those years just to look younger. And if someone asked me today what matters most, after all the meals, all the advice, and all the years, my answer would surprise them. Choose simplicity. Eat food that looks like food. Cook when you can. Share your table whenever possible. Walk a little every day. Sleep enough. Spend time outdoors. Stay curious. Keep learning. Forgive quickly. Call the people you love before you have a reason to wish you had. Don't postpone joy until some perfect future arrives. Life has a way of reminding us that tomorrow is never guaranteed. I've buried friends who were younger than I was. I've celebrated birthdays I never expected to see. Both experiences taught me the same lesson. This day is enough. This meal is enough. This conversation is enough. When I finish breakfast each morning, I don't wonder how many years I have left. I ask a different question. What good can I do with today? Sometimes the answer is very small. Write a letter, bake bread, pull weeds from the garden, read a psalm. Encourage someone who feels forgotten. Small acts performed consistently become a beautiful life. Perhaps longevity isn't really measured by the number of birthdays we celebrate, Perhaps it's measured by how much kindness we leave behind. If these 5 simple meals have taught me anything, it's this: nature rarely rushes. A tree doesn't hurry to bear fruit. A garden doesn't bloom overnight. Health grows much the same way, patiently, quietly, one choice at a time, one meal at a time, one grateful day at a time. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 102 years old. I don't know how many more sunrises I'll be blessed to see. But I do know this: every morning I wake up thankful. Every meal reminds me that simple things are often the most valuable. And every new day feels like another opportunity to live with purpose, to love generously, and to leave the world just a little warmer than I found it. If my story has encouraged you today, don't wait for next Monday, next month, or next year. Choose one healthy habit. Cook one wholesome meal. Spend one uninterrupted hour with someone you love. Small decisions, repeated over a lifetime, shape extraordinary lives. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Until we meet again, take good care of your body, treasure the people around you, and never underestimate the quiet power of a simple meal shared with gratitude.